Hey, it's the little ajoll in your screen. Did Nintendo give up on the Metroid series after Super Metroid? I mean, it took 8 years for Prime to come out, and they skipped some pretty popular consoles. If you just looked at release dates, it kind of seems like they did. Lucky for us, there's a lot more to the story. After Super Metroid came out in 1994, the Metroid franchise screeched to a halt. The N64 came out in 1996, and a whole generation of games didn't see a Metroid title join its ranks. Producer Shigeru Miyamoto said that Nintendo didn't make a Metroid game for the N64 for a few reasons. Broadly speaking, Super Metroid was really popular and wrapped the story up really well, so it would take a really good idea to get the ball rolling again. And well, they said they couldn't come up with any concrete ideas, which I would say is ground zero for making a video game. But I'm not exactly sure. I've never made a video game, so maybe you guys can tell me. I don't know. Also, Yoshio Sakamoto said that he couldn't imagine how the N64 controller could be used to control Samus. If one of the creators of the entire franchise says that a platform isn't right for their game, you should probably listen to him. They tried to get another developer to work on a game, and they said no as well. They probably came to the same conclusion. Metroid on the N64 would be half-baked at best. Players wouldn't have a good experience playing it, and the game would fail. When you put it all like that, it doesn't sound like Nintendo gave up on the series at all. That would be like knowing a car made of metal has questionable crumple zones with completely shoddy self-driving, but letting it self-drive you everywhere, especially on the interstate. I know some people that do that, but that's beside the point. It's a bad idea. Basically, it sounds like forcing a title on the N64 could have stunted or even killed the series, so Nintendo made the right decision. To wait. And that choice ended up paying off incredibly. By waiting for the right console, Metroid was properly brought into modern gaming and saw success for years after that. Not to say that other Metroid games weren't successful, they definitely were, but Nintendo wanted to be sure that they were meeting and exceeding fans' expectations. And if that meant a little bit of hiatus, then so be it. During all this downtime, Nintendo was waiting for the perfect conditions for success, or at least, if not the perfect conditions, then some good answers for the questions and concerns they'd already raised. At the turn of the century, Miyamoto, the producer, visited Retro Studios in Austin, Texas. This studio wasn't new to Nintendo. It was actually kind of a joint venture between Nintendo and this guy Jeff Spangenberg to get it founded. Retro was working on 4 titles at the time that Miyamoto visited. One of those titles, Metaforce, had an FPS engine that looked really promising for a future Metroid game. Long story short, Retro canceled all the other games, got the license to create a Metroid game, and Metroid Prime was born. That was really just the beginning. Pulling this game from a 2D side-scroller to the 3rd dimension would be no small feat. It would fundamentally change how players would interact with Samus and the greater Metroid saga. Gameplay, level design, sound design, really every aspect of the game would change. Initially, we were going to be playing from the 3rd-person perspective, and they really bought into this idea. I have to imagine that they felt like it would be less jarring for the player coming from 2D, and they wanted the opportunity to show off more of their level design. Lots of work had been done, but somewhere along the way, they decided it just wasn't viable. There were developmental difficulties, and the director, Mark Pacini, said that shooting really wasn't that intuitive, plus the exploration wasn't all that fun. Basically, the combat was going to suck and the movement wasn't going to help either. So everything was scrapped and they went with the 1st-person perspective. I'm personally really glad they did this. I felt like the game was super immersive, almost too immersive. And I really don't think we would have gotten that from a 3rd-person perspective. Plus, having played a bunch of 1st-person shooters gave me a really good base for jumping into this game. Interestingly enough, the FPS aspect of this game was a key focus during development. Knowing that this would now be a 1st-person shooter means you have to know what other games are doing at the time in that genre. I mean, Metroid Prime was the series' first venture into this like FPS genre, and you have to consider that at the time the Doom series kind of owned FPS. Really, it's considered the father of FPS games. The Doom games from that time retrospectively probably have their own issues or whatever, but you have to consider that Metroid Prime needed to live up to that level of quality for an FPS, and if they didn't, the game was probably not going to do well. This informed Retro Studios' next decision to stop calling Metroid Prime a 1st-person shooter and start calling it what it needed to be, a 1st-person adventure. They took it upon themselves to break down some common stereotypes they'd see in 1st-person games of the time and really see what it would take to make a fun Metroid game in this style. And while we're talking about genres, I think it's important to bring up that Metroid itself has sort of carved out its own space in a genre that stands on its own. Of course, I'm talking about Metroidvania games. Wikipedia offers this definition: a subgenre of action-adventure games and/or platformers focused on guided non-linearity and utility-gated progression. All of the Metroid games fall into this category, obviously. Super Metroid, the previous end of the Metroid series, is the game that sort of solidified the gameplay style that would be core to this genre. And Castlevania Symphony of Night from 1997 incorporated some role-playing elements that sort of rounded out the definition for this non-linear game genre. So as we turn the century and Retro has refocused into a first-person game, they have a whole new set of expectations that they have to meet or beat to have a winner. Now, if I had to describe Metroid Prime in one word, it would be Metroidvania. Crazy. I know it's really brave of me to say that, but from the first few minutes of the game, you know that you're getting a brand new, really, really fun platforming experience. Keep playing and you see a lot of cool enemies and landscapes. You figure out that you're going to be making a lot of laps on this map, but that's okay because the jumping feels really great and the levels start making sense pretty early. You get the morph ball, your missiles, your visors, and more. You get better and better gear that makes the combat even more fun to play. Your gear gets better and better as you learn how to defeat she-goths and pirates. You find cool areas, you fight cool bosses, and you save your progress a bunch, or else you'll lose it, like I did. And don't forget that there's a great story if you pay attention to it. I mean, Samus answers a distress beacon that goes horribly wrong. Meta Ridley escapes and Samus has to chase after him. They end up on Talon 4 where a Phazon meteor has destroyed planet life. Samus has to find the artifacts to get into the impact crater, fights Meta Ridley, and kills Metroid Prime. Twice. This game fit the bill of a classic Metroid game, but it did not look like one. It looked even better. I think the entire time the question that needed to be answered was if a Metroid game could be good in 3D. If the answer was yes, then you make it happen. And that's just what they did. All they had to do was wait for the GameCube and find an FPS game with a pretty good looking engine and yoink it. And by the way, we should be impressed that the GameCube ran this game the way that it did. You played the whole game at 60 FPS with some really incredible visuals that still hold up today. Hell, that's incredibly impressive. To make something like this even remotely possible, the developers had to get really creative on ways to maximize the efficiency of the console. Remember, we've got multiple map levels with their own sprawling corridors and levels. And every single one of those has textures and music and sound design and enemies and moving platforms and puzzles and scannables and, I mean, you get what I'm saying. To make all of that happen, the entire game was built to push the limitations of the system. One example of that is the point of view. With the first-person perspective, there was a max viewing height and the game limited your view to the direction that you were facing. Two things that would have been much harder to do if we were developing in the third-person perspective. Think about how many games you play now that have customizable FOVs or an easily switchable perspective. Those are legacy settings, allowing players to play what they're used to and to their liking. In 2003, it was designed to circumvent hardware limitations on an already massive undertaking of a video game. Another very creative way that the development team maximized their efficiency was with hidden loading areas. Well, the areas weren't hidden, but their use was. See, across the entire map, there are little gated corridors with nothing in them. You wonder what their use is, but you probably just assume they're for aesthetics. But no. These little rooms give the system a chance to load what's next for the player with nothing more than a few seconds added to your exploration. It's honestly genius, especially for its simplicity. Those are just examples that I can find online. I know for a fact that through every single step of the process, problems rose up like whack-a-moles or a hydra or however you want to look at it. I'm sure, like any game dev or coding or programming adventure, this turned into a really long series of this will probably work until the game finally shipped. Metroid Prime is a video game that could have very well turned out horribly, or at least very unfavorably. But it didn't. Nintendo waited. They got the right developers and they found the right system. They made sure to make a fun game first. They didn't skimp on visuals. The sound design is incredible. The levels are interesting. The controls are controllable. They created a great video game. I'm just glad that I got to play it 22 years later as part of my Game of the Year series here on YouTube and on Twitch. When you stop and think about it, it's even crazy that I got to say that. Man, what a time we live in. All of that being said, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe down below. I'm the little ajoll in your screen, and I will see you in the next video.